Welcome. I call the Eugene School District 4J Budget Committee meeting to order on Monday, April 17th. It's 6:03 p.m. We'll start with a roll call. We'll read off names. If you can say here, present, and raise your hand so folks can see you. Dakota Boulette.
I'm here.
I need my microphone on. There we go. Josh Burstein.
I'm here.
Welcome. Gary Campbell. I'm here. Tom DiLiberto.
Here.
And Fifield.
Here.
Kirti Hasijo Kaufman. I think she's running. Yeah. Alicia Haynes.
Here.
Michelle Shu.
Here.
Welcome. Gordon Lathrop.
Here.
Judy will be joining us a little bit. Laurel O'Rourke. Myra Vassachus.
Here.
Eric Richardson. And Erica Gleason.
Hi, I'm here.
Welcome. Thank you for that. And thank you everybody for being here this evening, both those who are here in person as well as those joining virtually. First item on the agenda today is items for action to approve the meeting minutes from the March 20th, 2023 budget meeting. Do I have a motion?
I move we approve the budget meeting minutes from March 20th, 2023.
Okay. Thank you, Alicia. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Dakota. Do I have any discussion? Seeing no discussion, we'll put to the vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Aye.
All those opposed, do the same. Meeting minutes from our last meeting passed unanimously. Thank you for that. All right. Next up, we have, we're following up from our questions that we had from staff. Matt Brown, Director of Financial Services, will speak to the questions that we had and the follow-up items he followed up with. So Matt, take it away.
Thank you. You should have received an email a week or so ago from Lisa that provided some additional information that was requested and asked at the last meeting. Briefly, just went over some of the EOA enrollment, some of the statistics about 504 plans, and some demographic information, as well as some capital projects and bond projects that are ongoing this year and what's planned for the future for those bond funds. So I'm happy to answer any additional questions that anybody may have.
Any questions for Matt? Yeah, Gordon, please.
Thank you. I have one question, or maybe it's not answering right now, but it's about the money that we were thinking of using to buy the E-Web building, and where that is, and are we still, I know it's not spent, but is it still in some ways targeted to be able to create a center for applied learning, or what's up with that? That's my official financial question.
We could definitely get back to you. The funds for the potential purchase of the E-Web building were from various sources that we had in between, kind of a conglomerate of all the funds that we found that we had available budget dollars. So that is technically would still be available depending on the use, what is budgeted this next fiscal year.
That's
Good questions.
This is Josh. I have a quick question on the EOA chart that's in our materials. It's page 11 of the 35 pages. And forgive me if this was answered in the email. I saw it when it came in, but I'm just looking at only the chart right now. Is this, are these, all the students listed here, are they necessarily from 4J catchment, or is it EOA? Because of course, anyone from, well, the state or even presumably the country or world could attend EOA, right? So I'm just curious, like the numbers of students we have, I'm trying to get a sense of how many quote students were quote losing, not to say losing because EOA is a 4J school. So of course there's still 4J students. I'm just curious kind of how many of the EOA folks are our own versus people coming in from other districts.
We can get the exact number for you, but because EOA is not a school, it's actually a program. Students are co-enrolled in the EOA program and their neighborhood school or their choice school if they've gotten in through the lottery. And so it's entirely possible that there are students who, previous to their enrollment in EOA, had gotten into the district, let's just say at Edgewood. And for whatever reason, they no longer wanted to attend a brick and mortar school, they wanted to go to EOA, they would still be connected as a 4J student to their, to the Edgewood placement.
A quick follow-up, if I may. The reason my question, I was thinking about charter schools and the fact that 4J loses a lot of dollars for our kids who go into charter schools. But if EOA is not a charter school, it's a program of 4J, then it sounds like to me that concern, which is what was behind my question, is not as big a concern because all of these students are 4J students in terms of funding from the state.
That is correct.
Okay. So yeah, never mind. No, don't need to look it up then, at least for me, unless anyone else wants it to. But that was where I was going with my question. Thank you so much, Andy.
Thank you, Josh. Yeah, Matt.
So I didn't sit and add these up, and I'm just assuming that there's overlap between these two. I didn't add these up, but just looking at it, it's obvious there's overlap between the categories. But and this might be a question that we can't get an answer to because of FERPA or whatnot, but out of those students with 504 plans, do we have an idea of how many of those are, medically complicated, fragile, compromised students? Or is that not something that we can take apart?
We would have some of that information if it was disclosed to us. In some situations, a student with a 504 plan may have some underlying medical condition that they don't disclose to the district. They just state that they wanted to get in. So we could have a better idea than no idea of how many of them, but I don't believe we'd be able to get an exact number.
Other questions? Yeah, Tom?
Yeah, just a comment that thanks for putting this together. It's very illuminating about who's going to EOA and really gave a lot of context to put on a graph. So anyway, thank you very much for this.
Josh? You have your hand up, Josh? He's talking to somebody. Anybody else? Thank you, Matt. I appreciate your time and effort in getting that information together for us. Next up on the agenda is public comment. So the budget committee sets aside time in each budget committee meeting to hear public comment. Community members can sign up to speak to the budget committee by submitting their request online at www.4j.wayne.edu/board/budget committee, or contact the superintendent's office at 541-790-7707. The deadline to do so is by noon on Monday before each meeting. Individual speakers are limited to 3 minutes and cannot give up their time to another speaker. Timekeeper will show a sign when the speaker has 30 seconds left and when their time is up. Speakers may offer objective comments or criticism about district operations and programs. For specific complaints about individuals, the district has a board policy and complaint process. If you need to go through that process, please contact the superintendent's office at 541-790-7707 for more information about submitting a formal complaint. And tonight we only have one person signed up to speak. And Lisa, if you can introduce this.
They are actually not online, so our one speaker is not with us.
Okay, so we do not have any public comments for this evening. Thank you very much. So I'll move on to the next agenda item. So next, we'll hear from Superintendent Day. You have the floor. Andy, enlighten us a bit here.
Thanks. Greetings, Budget Committee members. It's good to see you here in person or online. Thanks for taking some time out of your day to help out. Tonight, we'll hear from staff about budgets related to special revenue funds and the general fund. We've strategically set up our budget meetings to keep topics on point and ensure the committee receives information about all of our funds and our accounts. We specifically noted that this meeting will revolve around hearing about budgets for special revenue and general fund, some of the larger amongst our budget funds. At our last meeting, I noted that the board had approved the district's integrated guidance plan. Tonight, I'm happy to report that the district submitted the plan prior to the deadline and is in the process of working with OVE for their review and then the establishment of our longitudinal growth, projected growth targets. So that's a new process in the state, and you'll hear more and more about as we go through the process throughout the remainder of the spring. This week, April 16th through the 22nd, National Volunteer Appreciation Week. Very apropos given where I am with a bunch of volunteers spending their time. This budget committee is made entirely of volunteers. Our schools struggle to function without the efforts of school volunteers. The investment of time each of our volunteers, including those sitting around the table here tonight, give to our district is appreciated more than you can ever know. Our students see firsthand how our community supports and values public education by having volunteers present in our schools and in our district each and every day. Our staff recognize and appreciate the partnership volunteers provide in our daily work, and I personally appreciate the time invested by community members such as you and those who serve on other 4J committees and in our schools. I want to express my sincerest gratitude to all of you and to each of those that volunteer anywhere in our district. Thank you very much. With that, I'd like to turn the meeting back to you, Derek. And I believe Matt has a presentation he's looking forward to sharing this evening. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Superintendent Day. I also will just chime in and say thank you to everybody who's volunteering to help support the district, both here this evening on our board, as well as volunteers working with our students. So thank you very much for that. And next on the agenda is item for information. So this evening we've got a budget committee presentation with Matt Brown again. Matt, if you want to take it away, and we'll get into our next bit of information for the budget. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you very much. So Lisa will queue up the presentation for those on Zoom and watching online. Like we did in the previous meeting, we'll go kind of fund by fund, and we'll talk a little bit about each fund, so please do not hesitate to chime in if you have questions or raise your hand if you're on Zoom to make sure that we can see you, and we'll get through everything in one piece. Sound good? All right. So this evening, Lisa, can you go to the next slide? So this evening, as Dr. Dye mentioned, we're going to be talking about special revenue funds and then specifically general fund revenue. So we'll go through those slides and don't hesitate to ask questions. This first slide here is a overall special purpose source fund for you. Well, what I've done is kind of conglomerate all of the special use funds into specific categories, whether those resources come from federal, states, privates, or other resources. This gives you kind of an idea of where we get a lot of our revenue from for these special purpose funds. Yeah?
Real quick, is there a way to put you in presenter mode so we have a little bit larger view of those for the folks that are following online?
Maybe.
Possibly.
That better?
Yes, thank you very much.
A little bit bigger. Okay. So, as the pie chart shows, roughly about $87.2 million in resources for our special purpose funds across all of the different categories, and we're going to look at every single one. So, on the federal side, those blue pieces of the pie chart, those make up 4 of our funds. First one is our federal grants funds. This is mainly going to encompass our Perkins and ESSER dollars. We have our Fund 202, which is our other federal grant funds. This is mainly a natives grant that we receive. Fund 210 is all of our title funds that we receive. So these are federal monies that are intended to supplement some of the existing funding for education. And then we have our IDEA fund, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So the first two funds we're going to look at are the federal grant dollars, so that's funds 201 to 202. As I mentioned before, funds 201 is mainly our ESSER dollars that we have. So ESSER is a conglomerate of about 3 tranches of money that we got from the federal government over a period of time. We are currently spending on ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 dollars. All of the ESSER dollars must be spent technically by September of 2024. So we have all of this next fiscal year and then a few months into the other fiscal year to spend those dollars. We are currently budgeting to spend every available dollar by June 30th of next fiscal year. We anticipate that we will have some leftover money by the end of June because typically we don't spend every single dollar, but that lag of 3 months allows the district to make any adjustments or journal entries to make sure that we're not leaving any money on the table. Okay. One thing to note here that is, I think, worth mentioning is the salary line item for the next fiscal year. You can see in the current budgets it's about 7.3 million, and it's going to drop down to about 3.1. That is specifically and cognizantly done on purpose because ESSER dollars are one-time dollars. We want to try and transition all of our staffing that is currently in ESSER to other funding sources that are ongoing if those positions are intended to ongo. Okay. So a lot of that 3.1 that is existing are maybe some ongoing positions, but it's a lot less than we've had in 2023, or they are temporary or term limited positions. In Fund 202, we have the natives grants. Not a huge amount of money in the grand scheme of things, a couple $100,000, that is our natives grants. Any questions over Funds 201 or 202?
Please, board.
Sorry to be the problem child. I just wanted to see if you could say, if there's any more you could say about the last point you were talking about basically how much of the one-time money, the ESSER money or the COVID dollars is being spent on kind of ongoing, continuing things. And so I understand 3.1 is less than what happened before, and most of 3.1 is not actually permanent things, but are temporary things that will be done by the end of the year. So is there an estimate of is there some amount that we think, all right, here's going to be a cliff that we get to the end of next year, we have some money that is intended in permanent things that we're going to have to either stop doing that or find another way to pay for it? And we have an idea of how big that number is?
So we do have a program list of everything that's been budgeted for next fiscal year. Dr. Guy's been working with his leadership team on reviewing what was originally approved a few years ago when you first got ESSER dollars, transitioning to where we are now, what has been done. Hasn't been done, what are the things that didn't make the list initially that we've added programs or services like that. So I think the idea is for there to be a transition point, the step, not just a sudden cliff that we get to. But I'm sure Dr. Dye would be able to, or we can share some points of what that plan is, to give you a better idea of what those specific dollars and programs and what ongoing staffing costs there may be that we're looking at transitioning over the next years.
Just have to be tonight, so.
Sure, I can provide you with more information with some time to prepare. It's a moving target because there are some positions that we budgeted for that we were never able to fill. And other issues that arose that we thought, well, here's a perfect opportunity to try something. We'll go through a process of review this year to see whether or not it is worthy of being an ongoing project or an ongoing commitment. But I'd love to give you more accurate and thoughtful information at a later time, if that's okay.
Great, thanks.
Come on.
I'm wondering if you can share with us, I know it seems like a small amount of money, but it matters to some folks a lot. The Fund 202, the natives program, why does it go down by so much between 23 and 24?
You want to talk about natives?
Sure, I can talk about natives. Well, I'm not an expert on it. Part of what you'll find with grants is that a lot of it is reimbursements of expenses that fall under the umbrella that that grant covers. So oftentimes, what you'll see at the beginning of the year as far as the budget will be our best guess at what we anticipate we're going to be receiving through that grant. And then as the year goes on, and we sometimes will qualify for additional funds, we will, as those additional funds are granted to us, we then do an adjusted supplemental budget and then add those funds onto it. So the difference that you're seeing here is between what we're using as a placeholder and as far as like what we anticipate is a good estimate of what we'll receive from the grant. But it doesn't mean that that's the final number that we'll have at the end of the year.
And then I have a follow-up question. My understanding is there's been a shift from the NAIMS program being kind of independent and self-run with the grant process done by the folks in the NAIMS program. Is that part, as they've been kind of brought into the district as a whole, has that component of their work, meaning the applying for the reimbursement part, is that now being covered by district staff, or is that still the director of the NAIMS program responsibility?
That's a very good question, but I would have to speak to them to get more detail on that for you.
Thank you.
They're still, they're part of our diversity, equity, inclusion efforts, whereas in the past, they weren't. We now provide, either through general fund or SIA, other grants, funds to support the cost of staffing so that the Title VI grant that they receive can be dedicated to direct services to students. They've always had financial support from district office staff, assistance as needed, but they conduct all of the work that leads up to the development of the grant, the submission of the grant, and the management of the grant itself.
Hey Maya, if I can add just one small thing. When you look at the budget for this fiscal year, we show obviously the $314,000 that you see. But I should note that when we're reviewing budgets ongoing throughout this year, as of December, we've only spent about $124,000. So likely you will see a budget adjustment, or when this budget moves to an actual, you're gonna see that number drop down a little bit.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
I know you all covered this last year on the ESSER. This is one time, this money is not coming back. This will be the next fiscal year will be the end of it, right? Drops to zero.
While hope springs eternal, that's correct.
It was COVID money.
COVID.
Well, so hope springs eternal, we don't have to do that again.
Right, different driving mechanism maybe, but yeah, September 2024 is at this point in time when we can no longer make use of any COVID relief.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move forward to.
Hold on just a second.
Oh, sorry.
One thing that I'd like to follow up on, speaking to sort of what Gordon's getting at as well, if we could get maybe a projection of the next 2 years. We got the 2024 proposed amount from that 201 fund. The amount of FTE tied to those, you can see how much is being spent on that in this next fiscal year after this budget. Like the next 2 years of projected funds coming in through that fund, as well as FTE associated with those funds. You get those projected out in the next presentation. Does that make sense? So projected funds and FTE tied to those funds.
Correct. I think in answering your question, Dr. Dye and I can put together the program that's been approved for this 2024 fiscal year. And within that program, we'll have staffing allocations and FTEs that we can probably earmark for what is ongoing positions that we will have to find another funding source in the future years versus term limited positions that when ESSER funds are done, that means the positions.
Yeah, that'd be useful. Thank you.
Might also be helpful, 87 cents of every dollar that we spend is on staffing, and that's a pretty stable, durable number. So that should also help provide you with some sense of how many activity they do.
Sorry to interrupt. Okay, moving forward to Fund 210 and 220. So 210 is our title funds. You can see we're estimating a proposed and expenditure budget of about 8.4 million, and for the IDEA grant, about 4.3 million. Pretty steady, so to speak, as far as resources. Like Bob had mentioned earlier, these are grant funds, so they're reimbursable, so we make sure the budget, as you see, actuals match the resources and expenditures of what we're spending. Are there any specific questions, though, on the title funds or IDEA grant?
I have a question just on the difference on a lot of these. FY '23 is significantly higher than FY '24, and is that explained by your explanation of like, you want to make sure you have enough money in the budget, and then some of this will just get transferred over? You're not probably gonna spend all of the amount in FY '23 in a lot of these funds?
It is very likely that we will not spend all of that budgeted dollars. Yeah.
And is that true? Is that true? You got on the ESSER, and then 210 and 220, they're all quite big for this FY, and it's just to make sure the money.
Yeah,
you're able
that's-
to
So as I mentioned,
move it over.
whereas we budget $3.4 million in the fund as of December, I can show that we've only, or 314,000, we've only spent 120. So it's
So everything
likely
looks
that-
like it drops off next year, but it's
Correct.
merely
It's merely-
accounting.
A budget is merely a best guess of what we're going to receive.
I think I have a version of the same question. I know there's often a difference between budget and actuals, and you want it to go down as opposed to go up. But does this, let's say on the IDEA funding, so we're budgeting 5.1 for this year, and we spent 3.4 last year in FY '22. So is that 5.1, is that what we guessed would be available, and then it turns out it wasn't, or is that, I'm sure this isn't true, but I would hate to be in a situation where there's federal money available for special education that we weren't using during the course of the year, which is what the numbers look like, and I assume that's not true, so can you explain to me what the right way to understand the numbers is?
For specifically the IDEA or title
Right, I
grants.
mean, that's federal funding, right, so does that mean we think that we have $5.1 million available for the federal government for IDEA? And then we do everything possible to spend all of it?
We definitely would. Some of the positions can be that we budgeted positions in IDEA or title grants that we may not be able to fill. By the time those positions come in. To give you an idea, I'm looking up at the IDEA grant with the 5.1 million budgeted for this fiscal year. As of December, it looks like total expenses right now are 1.7 million. So it's a pretty drastic difference. 5.2 million that's budgeted initially. So like the other grants, we may budget to do a lot of things, but by the time we actually get to do them, we may have staffing issues. There may be some issues with our supply chains and what we're purchasing for those grants. Those kind of items that come up every single year.
And also, if I could piggyback off of that, a lot of times we'll have the grant award in the current year, we'll budget it. At the end of the year, we will not have spent down all of the award, and a portion of that can roll over to the next year in many instances. So that'll show up as revenue the following year, but it's from a grant that was given to us in the current year. So it's not like we would be leaving money necessarily on the table, but we might not be able to spend it all in the year that it was originally awarded. So that money would then be added occasionally onto the next year's appropriation.
I know this is the most obvious thing in the world, but if there's anything that you think in a future meeting, oh, there's something we could be doing to be being more efficient and making sure that we're actually spending all the money that the feds might give us for this. Sure, I can support that.
I think, Bob, what you just said is an excellent explanation for what you see as an increase in Davis funding. an increase in that one fiscal year. We didn't have a large increase in the number of students in the program. What we had is rollover funds from previous years where money really couldn't be spent.
Thanks.
Any other questions on funds 210 or 220? Okay, we'll move forward to the next section, which is state and local funding. So in there we have three main funds. Fund 250, which is our state and local grants. These are a combination of lots of smaller grants that we receive. And then we have funds 251 and 252, which is our Student Investment Act, as well as our high school success. Those are both part of the integrated guidance and the plan that was approved by the board just last month. So first up is Fund 250, our state and local grants. Currently we're budgeting about 4.7 million that's proposed next year. Excuse me. Any questions regarding state and local grants that either myself or Dr. Dunn can answer? Similar pictures to what we've seen in the past with the lower budgets.
No, I have a different question.
No, okay.
So in the slide that for the next one, that's not up there, but the Fund 251 and 252, it says federal sources, but aren't those state? I just don't understand why it would be federal sources, not state.
Oh, that would be a template.
Okay, no problem. I was just getting hopeful that maybe there was gonna be another slide that was another round of several, $15 million, but.
So SIA on the next slide and high school success, as I mentioned before, part of integrated guidance and that plan that was approved by the board. So these numbers reflect the budget that was adopted by the board and the programs that was adopted as well. Any questions that either myself or Dr. Dye can answer regarding integrated guidance?
Except that you went too fast for me.
Okay.
I kind of missed, you definitely faster than I could track. On the 250, is it this federal sources line, is that what you were asking about, Maya?
I was asking about the federal sources line on the next one, the Fund 251.
So you
252. I went ahead, I'm sorry. But no, I mean, the same question would hold for what's those, I mean, it's like $4,000, like, what are, and in fact, in fiscal year 21, it was 8 million, but what are the federal sources for the Fund 250?
Looks like that is a new grant that is proposed for this year, or this upcoming budget year.
The $4,500.
The $4,500.
It was, and so this year, 250 is dropped off quite a bit, and it does look like the big ticket item was this federal of 8.3 and 21. But that's, how does it end up here? Why is it different from everything, all the federal funds? Is it a COVID thing?
Was it something related to gear funds or something from the state that they passed through federal dollars to the districts that you guys didn't have discretion on or something?
Special purpose funds often come with some degree of agency, but not nearly as much as general fund. So, for example, with high school success, we have great deal of discretion in how we spend those dollars, provided that our efforts are aligned with the grant itself. 9 grade on track, dropout prevention, access to dual credit courses in high school, career technical education.
And is it high school success, that's a federal funding?
No, high school success is a state.
It's not, okay.
There are state and federal grants that can be sizable, but are really focused on what we can do.
Right.
So that's why we designate them differently than we would any other federal funds.
Okay, it was something a little bit fit into a different box and a bigger.
Right.
The 8.3 million back in fiscal year 21 was specifically ESSER $1 that the district received. So they were recorded in Fund 250.
Okay, oh, okay,
Before a
yes.
separate fund, before ESER 2 and 3, which were placed into Fund 201, which are federal corps.
And I see, and it was a big chunk of change. It was budgeted in 21, and you didn't spend it all in 21. You spent $5 million less than what you had resources for.
Correct.
While I haven't researched it, I would be pretty confident in my guess that it's one of two things. Either the supply chain was such that we couldn't get the things that we ordered, or we weren't able to fill positions that we posted.
Yes.
Yeah, keep in mind ESER 1 was right at the time of the beginning of COVID when everything was crazy.
That's right.
Any other questions about Student Investment Act or high school success? Okay, we'll move on to private funding, which is our Fund 260 donations, and then 270 and 275, which have to do with our Eugene Education Foundation gifts and grants. So our donations fund is about $740,000 that we are estimating in revenue and expenses. Any questions regarding general donations? This is kind of a best guess of what we're going to receive based on previous years. Okay, we'll move on to Funds 270 and 275, our EEF gifts and grants. Are most of us familiar with the Eugene Education Foundation? So we divide them up into two funds because one is gifts, one is grants. We purposely do not budget anything in our grants funds because we don't know what's going to be received. Once we receive those funds, then we enter those into our budget line items. The board will see this as a supplemental budget as we continue going throughout the year. Typically about May or June, when we do a supplemental budget for the end of the year, we clean everything up to record what we've actually received and what we've expensed. So for Fund 275, that is why you don't see a proposed budget.
Just real quick, I'm wondering if the salaries in fiscal year 22, if those dropped off because there was other funds that took the place of the EF grants to fund the salaries, or if those were just positions that were gone.
So usually the EF gifts are targeted for a specific need, so they will indicate a specific position that they would like to partially fund or fully fund. And so it's all based on what they see as the needs and what they have as revenues that they can then supply to us to help us with it.
This is Josh. So to follow up on that, for example, the proposed budget as 110,000 for salaries, which is at least twice as much as this current year and a lot more than the last couple of years. So is there a thought or a need or a request already kind of out there that you're expecting or thinking would be able to be funded by this group?
So, not at this point, again, in order for us to appropriate funds in order to cover those things, what we do is we look at historically what we have received and requests that have been made, and we attempt to put in an appropriation that will be able to cover that. Once we have, again, an actual understanding of what that will be as part of a supplemental budget, we will make that match, but the actual gift is.
Just looking at the totals, which I guess is most
Yeah,
of
that's
the materials, it jumps so dramatically from 100,000 in 2022 to 600,000 to 1.2 million. Is that a COVID effect that like during COVID schools were closed and we didn't have what to spend money on, and now everything's open, so we have to spend money? Like I can't imagine that our fundraising actually grew by tenfold. So is it like a pileup of money that was donated, but we couldn't spend it during COVID and now we're spending it?
We'll have the details.
Or if you don't, if that has to wait till the next meeting, that's okay.
To give you an idea, this is likely going to be another rollover situation. As of December, it looks like for specifically Fund 270, even though we have budgeted $620,000, it looks like we have expensed about $24,000. And those are specifically, obviously, gifts that are given to teachers and other situations where money just has not been spent.
Okay, I guess, I mean, I know this is not a huge chunk of the budget, but at some point, it would be nice to get maybe a presentation from somebody at EEF. You know, every time I go online and I see the donors choose these funding, GoFundMe things from teachers in our district, asking for things that seem like that they're kind of things that would be appropriate to fund out of EEF. I'm not saying I pick what's the right thing to fund, but if we had allocated $630,000, it's about 24,000, so even more.
Yeah. I had actually guessed that you have all of this federal money and to use it or lose it, right? And so if it were me, then I'd tuck this away because is there any kind of, did this money turn into a pumpkin in the way that ESSER money turns into a pumpkin?
EEF grants we do send back if they're unspent.
We do, I don't know that definitively, but I have a note to get more information on that, we can bring it back to the committee, so we have a better understanding.
EEF might say in some situations or might not say in some
It would
situations.
depend, and so this is not like, 4J did not get $600,000.
Right.
Teacher A at school B got $10,000, and that's happened all across the whole district, and so it's individual teachers are responsible for, and so it's a huge amount. It's very complex.
Generally, EEF will put out a request for proposals, and then teachers have the opportunity to apply. EEF consistently has areas of focus for that year's funding and gift giving. Sometimes teachers anticipate doing something that they in the end can't do for one reason or another.
Supply chains.
Maybe. And generally EEF is very kind in working with us.
It does seem, given the last meeting we had a very long conversation about the free lunch and the complexities around not collecting the data from, and seemed like an obvious fundraising opportunity, and it does, and I think that that's a lot of money EEF is giving the district every year, that's real money, that I think it's a generous community, that there's clearly some overlap there, and I think communicating how grant funds are spent helps generate more grant funds. Thank you.
Any other questions? Not saying we will move forward. So we have the last section, which is our other special revenue funds. So they encapsulate our billables, which is some of the services that we provide outside to other entities that we bill for. We have our radio station in Fund 262, set up as a separate entity. We have funds 280 and 281 technically, which are our student body funds and student donation funds. We have our 290, which is our special purpose reserve fund, I should say, instead of purchase. And then Fund 299, which is our nutrition services. So Fund 261 and 262 are the first up. 261, as I mentioned, are some of the services that we provide to outside entities and bill for on a monthly, quarterly, or yearly basis. And then we have Fund 262, which is our radio station, self-funded and set up as a separate entity as well. Any questions on 261 or 262? And Stu would love to hear any questions about the radio station. 'Cause I know he's
I had
listening.
I'm sorry, I had a question. You mentioned food services, and I was just trying to glean whether free school lunches is part of the budget or if that is somewhere else.
We will actually get to that when we do nutrition services, I think in about 1 or 2 slides.
Is Stu interested in my feedback on the music he chooses? They do a great job.
Okay, we'll move forward to Fund 280 and 290. So 280 and 281 technically are our student body funds and donations, as well as 290, which is our special purpose reserve fund. Any questions that myself, Bob, or Dr. Dye can answer in relation to these funds?
Is the student body fund the fund that, school supplies comes out of? I know the past few years we've been covering school supplies, and I've heard a rumor that we are no longer gonna be covering school supplies.
It can be. We have a lot of those funds that we give to schools in an amount of, each school, I believe, is given about $10,000 from ESSER to help fund supplies. Some schools have used almost every penny, some schools have not used any. So we've been communicating with the secretaries and assistants at each school to make sure that they use those dollars available by the end of June, because those dollars will not roll over into the new fiscal year.
Okay. And does that mean that without those extra dollars, we won't be able to offer support for school supplies?
I don't believe that would be the case in any minds.
Okay, so that's still a possibility?
Yeah, it's just a decision as to where it comes from.
Okay, so
Made no mistake, having access to extra dollars has made that
easier.
a very easy decision.
Okay,
It won't be so easy in a year or two, but it doesn't by default make it impossible.
okay.
I think it's one of the things we should focus on as a community. We should be funding our teachers. We should be devoting our money towards things like school supplies.
Can you speak to the salaries increase for the 2023 budget?
Let's see.
Do you have that off the top of your head, Bob? It looks like there is a very large portion that was recorded as an ending fund balance in the budget. And somehow that is included in salaries.
I also think 21, fiscal year 21 salaries is really, really low. Some of the things that come to mind are budgets for coaching salaries. There are very many coaches getting paid in 2021. That's why I would imagine if we look back in 18, 19, you would see something much closer to 22 than you would see for 20.
Okay.
That doesn't explain that.
Yeah, I could assume like a
increase.
combination of fewer adults being needed to be in person, as well as the offset of the extra funds, like maybe we're paying for stuff out of extra funds now that will be transferred.
Yeah, so out of that $2.85 million that is budgeted in salaries, it looks like $1.5 million is budgeted for an ending fund balance. $1.2 million is budgeted for school supplies and student body funds. So that 2.8 should actually be $1.2 million more in supplies and materials, and then other uses of 1.5. The total remains the same at 8.25. This is one of those funds with about 2,700 lines to it. So I apologize for the mistake. Yeah, that will be corrected on the final resolution that the budget committee sees.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, so I have just one, I guess one frustration that with all the charts that we're looking at, we have got pandemic on the right, or excuse me, on the left, and then on the right, what's gonna be. But what's hard is for all these things, maybe it's the lack of spaces that, what was it like before the pandemic? So, these pandemic numbers are all crazy, and we all know why. But when we talk about all these brass tacks, even smaller, it's difficult to establish what was reality then in a lot of different ways. Especially when we'll be talking, I guess, about, or the board will be talking about FTE. How many troops do we have before? How many are we projecting next year and all that? It's just it's just hard to establish what was reality and what are we going back to more or less what we were like as a district and how we spend our money. So anyway, it's just a general frustration. I guess you'd have to pull these things apart, put 2 more years before fiscal year 21 before we actually see all that data. And I understand the limitations, but I just wanted to voice that.
Any other questions for funds 280 and 290? So we'll move on to Fund 299, which is nutrition services. So a couple things to note here. In the budget for this current fiscal year in 2023, you'll see a beginning balance currently at $0. When the budget was approved this time last fiscal year, it was not assumed that there would be any rollover amounts into this fiscal year. Happily to report that there are roughly about $1.7 million of rollover. So when the board approves, or hopefully approves a supplemental budget, that $1.7 million should be recognized and added to that fund. You'll notice in fiscal year 24 that we are proposing a transfer in of a little over $2.3 million, as well as a beginning fund balance of $850,000. That $2.3 million is essentially a transfer, most likely from the general fund or another source, that will help keep nutrition services in line as what I would refer to as an enterprise fund, where it self-funds itself, okay? If you add in the $2.3 million plus the $850,000 beginning balance, if those were not there, that would mean that to continue nutrition services in its current state with the free meal program, that there would be a requirement of a transfer of roughly about $3.1 million. Now, this is something we have anticipated this fiscal year. We know it's a very hot topic, discussions point with the board and the budget committee and our community. It is something that we can afford to do over the first couple of years that we go into the future. We have a lot of hope at the state level and the federal level that resources will come from those levels. We know that House Bill 3030 was reintroduced to help fund some of those programs. It was originally taken off, but now it's back on. So hopefully that continues through its course, as well as some federal sources and dollars that may come along the lines. This budget proposal allows us, gives us time to have meaningful engagements and discussions and wait and see what the state and federals do at that level, and then we can have a more meaningful discussion once we know what their plans are. Any discussions on nutrition services?
This is Josh. I raised my hand virtually, but I'll just speak up. A quick question: that $3.1 million number, which of course is large, I just want to make sure we understand what it represents. Are you saying that it's 3.1 million more than before in order to have free meals for all? Because I don't think that's what you're saying. I think that number, if I remember correctly from last year, was less than that, maybe a third of that. But this is just I guess I'm confused by what you just said about the 3.1 million. Do you see where my question's coming from? I'm trying to get a sense of if we were to not do the free meals for everyone suddenly, how much less would be in the budget, i.e. how much does it really cost? Is it 3.1 million or is it something different to have continue the free meals?
So there's a few different items to bring up in a response to you. A couple things to note is when we're looking at the budget, as Tom mentioned earlier, we can only kind of really see what's happened during COVID. And obviously that's where a lot of things happened in fiscal year 21 and 22 when there's a lot of craziness going on. The current budget for fiscal year 23 assumes that this fund would need assistance of $1.5 million to stay green on a consistent basis and self-fund itself. In the previous years, in fiscal year 21-22, you can see those numbers were roughly about $750,000 and $500,000. This is before we actually knew, when the district decided to not use a professional service for catering and bring it more in-house. We have about 2 or 3 years of, I don't know what's going to happen, and these costs are not real. So this fiscal year 24, hopefully, will be a first year of a truly realized cost of what nutrition services needs to operate at a full capacity with our school district. So we're anticipating that $2.3 million plus the $850. We also have the assumptions for the proposed budget are increased costs for supplies and materials. So that's has to do a lot with our supply chain issues and getting food and what we're purchasing and where it's coming from, as well as the personnel costs that go along with it. So you see an increase in salaries and associated payroll costs. That is a direct effect of the bargaining union agreement that was agreed to and those costs that are associated with the personnel that work in those positions.
If I may follow up, if no other colleagues have questions right now, I'd appreciate 2 questions. One is what I hear you're saying, and I think I get it, is there's really not a control group easily comparable in the sense that we had a pandemic, and that's enough. There's no need for a B, and the money coming in. So I guess my only concern going forward is I worry that a couple of years from now, there may be someone may look at this as a line item and say $3 million, that could be X number of people, that could be X number of school buildings. That could, well, I know it's different funds, but not everyone in the public understands that. And so I just worry that if we, as a budget committee, and obviously as a board, when we make our recommendation to the board, look at this and say, we are committed to, if we say we are committed to free meals for all, that we get a good way to figure out what that cost is. Because I just fear that someone might look at this and say $3 million, we could take $1 million off of that and still have meals for most people or whatever, and then use that $1 million for something else. So I just want to, that's kind of where my question was coming from. I get that there's not a control group easily comparable. So I just want us to be careful over the next couple of years, I think, as we look at these numbers. That's just one kind of thought on that. And then the second follow-up, just a quick question. The salaries that you mentioned, I see obviously going up, well, went down for FY23, but expected to go up FY24. Those individuals are OSEA, correct? Union, when you said bargaining, that's what you were talking about?
That's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for all the information.
I note as well, when you're looking at the proposed budget of the 2.6 and the 2.8 million, that is with the assumption that they are fully staffed. Okay, so the actuals of what may actually happen by the time we're here next year or the year after that will see less than that 2.6 and 2.8. But as far as appropriating what is needed to run the program, the assumption is that they will be fully staffed.
I wanted to always follow up on what Josh was asking about. So one is just to understand, we're going to be presented a budget sometime in May and asked to approve it as the budget for next year. And at this point, we're expecting that budget will include the continuation of free meals based on the amount that we presented here. So that was my understanding. I just wanted to confirm that. And then The other thing is, for whenever we can get it, I have the same question that Josh did, which, I know these things, it seems like what's the cost of free meals is some combination of the meals that kids are not being paid for, and then is there an increase in the total number of meals that people eat because there's no charge for it, but I assume that a lot of the increase in salary costs, certainly with student bargaining, would change with that, and supply materials, I don't know, because I feel like it's probably calculable, with some pretty good rough accuracy, and that would be good to know for all the reasons that Josh said, doesn't have to be tonight.
Would you tell me the House bill again that you said was dead and alive again?
House Bill 3030, I believe it is.
3030, okay, right.
It is HB 3030.
Thank you.
Any other questions on nutrition services?
Out of ignorance, could we fund any nutrition services out of the operating levy? If we were to pass the voters?
Out of our current,
No, if we were to put it to voters.
Oh, add it to the operating levy?
well, the operating levy as we currently have it, the $1.50, is those funds go into our general fund, which we have discretion over how we spend. If your question is it possible to try to increase that levy as a way to increase revenues? I mean, that is always possible. But again, there's other considerations to think of whenever you're going to be, changing what you're going down to.
There is a cap, I mean, you can't.
Yeah, I mean, currently we are still compressed, only slightly. Compression is a very complicated and very uniquely Oregon thing. And if we have a couple of weeks, I could try to explain it to you. But like I said, right now, yes, we are compressed. I think we get about $1.28 of our $1.50 on average. But as if we continue to see the real market values of homes continue to increase, which is a big question at this point, we would see that compression continue to decrease. But at this point, we still not receive a full increment of our $1.50, much less than
I would just say that obviously, if you wanted to put that part in free and reduced lunch or free lunch, that would be something you would consider if you would get more votes with it, or if it's too complicated to explain. So, yeah, I love the 3 to 4 day retreat on good times. If you can do it before I leave, that'd be great.
So this is Josh, and I'm going to jump in. I'm going to take you up on that, Alicia. No, I sit here as a lay member of the budget committee. So unlike Gordon, who thankfully expanded on my points, and Alicia with what you just said, I'm not running for anything, so I can say what I want. No, I'm kidding. Let me say this, and I know I've been talking about this for years, and I know a lot of us and others on this call, on this meeting, have spoken more eloquently than I about the need for this. A budget's a moral document. We all have heard that more than once. And I'm just going to say my thought, just since, and I know this is not necessarily, well, maybe it is the time because we have the funding chart in front of us, but if you're going to look at this even just from an economic standpoint, if you're just going to take a step back and not even think about we should feed our kids, just think of it as a loss leader. You go to the supermarket to get the milk for $1.09, and then you're in there and you buy that fancy whatever they're trying to sell you, the chicken. Well, I don't know, I don't eat chicken, I'm vegetarian, but the chicken dinner thing, or I don't know. At the very worst, just from a pure economic standpoint, and I don't know how many of my colleagues I even have to convince of this at this point, but just to say it, we get the kids in the door, we get them fed, maybe the only meal or two they have all day, but that is going to be such a game changer for their lives. And all the other stuff we're funding, teachers, school buildings, everything else won't matter if they're not able to pay attention, if they're not there to be able to see what's going on. So again, I know I'm preaching to the converted, and I know that we've talked this to no end, but I just think it's that important that I wanted to take, sorry, there's the last 45 seconds to say that. Thank you.
And Erica, I see you.
Yeah, I really want to agree. I mean, hungry kids can't learn. And so I mean, I continue to really push for this because there's a significant number of people who can't afford to feed their children, but also do not qualify for free and reduced lunches. And also there's things like language barriers and other things. And so I still think that this is well worth it. And as far as the salaries being, you know, higher because of union negotiations, I want to pay the people that are making food to feed our kids a living wage so that they can also feed their families. So, but I'm glad to see this in here, and I realize funding does not grow on trees, but I really appreciate that we're putting this in there because I mean, hungry kids cannot learn, and hungry kids may be prone to having more behavior issues or different things because they're literally malnourished. So, anyways, I appreciate you guys.
Thanks, sir. Okay, so we'll move on to general fund revenues. So this is intended to give you a snapshot preview of the general fund. We don't intend this evening to talk about any of the expenses. We're still in the process of putting that all together into a formidable proposal budget to share with you at our next meeting, actually. But we do have our revenue figured out, and so I wanted to show you a couple of pie charts just to put some things into perspective about where we get our revenues from and what types of revenues we see. So that's the intention of these two pie charts, to show you local sources, state sources, federal sources, beginning fund balance, and then of the revenue in the general fund, how much is from the state school fund, how much is property taxes. And I should remind everyone that the budget proposal that you're seeing for revenues is under the assumption of a $9.9 billion budget. Any questions on the pie charts? Okay. Yeah.
That beginning balance, does that include reserves or is reserves?
That does.
It does, okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
And then on the next slide is more of a graphical representation of what you've been seeing over the last couple of meetings of local sources, state sources, in a more analytical view.
Eric, I see your hand up. Do you have a question?
Can you explain what an intermediate source is?
There's a laundry list of items.
A few examples just to help wrap my head around it.
Let's see. Do you know off the top of your head?
That would go.
Trying to see where you placed everything. So intermediate sources are like ESD payments particularly, so monies that we're getting from the other education districts. And then there's some trickle of smaller revenues that also come not from any particular state or federal source that are intermediate.
Okay, thanks.
I believe the ESD payment, if I recall, is roughly about 2.7 million estimated this fiscal year for the proposed budget. So of that $3 or so million that you see, majority of it is the ESD payment.
So I'm curious because when I look at fiscal year 2023, we're in, going into next year, it shows at least the bottom line total resources, a little bit of increase, including in the state sources. I'm reading that right, correct?
Correct.
So if you base this on the 9.9 billion, we're hearing, so in real money, though, this is less. I mean, because at least we're being told by all the education advocacy groups that we need to have 10.3 billion to be even. So the real numbers go up, but not enough to keep up with our costs, so at some point, we're gonna see what that really looks like, is that?
Correct, and we'll dive into this a little bit deeper in the next meeting, especially when we talk about the general fund expenditures. But you have, over the last 4 to 5 years, really increased your staffing. Licensed staff, classified staff, I mean, all categories have gone up proportionately over the last 4 to 5 years. So eventually you get to a point where your linear kind of graph of how much staffing you have is larger than the graph of your increasing revenue sources. So eventually you get to a point where you're spending more than you actually have in money coming in. So there's a cross-reference point that you need to get to eventually. And we're not there yet. Forgia is very fortunate in that it has a very healthy fund balance to allow you to look at making adjustments over time. It's not something that, like very other school districts and much smaller school districts, have a proverbial cliff at the end of ESSER dollars or other situations. Whereas 4J has a very healthy fund balance, it allows us to take more time, we have more meaningful discussions about what staffing looks like in year 5 or year 10. I'm not sure if Bob we're talking about jumping in.
I mean, I would just piggyback on that. I mean, we've talked about this 87 cents of every dollar goes towards staffing. So increases in staffing costs obviously are the most dramatic as far as increasing the overall cost of the district. Looking at about a 6.5% increase going from the current state school fund up to what they're projecting at 9.9. Our staffing costs are, at least in the immediate term, have gone up slightly more than that. And then you're also seeing all of our additional costs. Everyone has seen the headlines about what inflation is doing currently. So when you hear talk about this not matching what the increases we're seeing in the real world are, that's really what you're looking at. You know, all across the country, we've seen some pretty healthy wage increases, and they're exceeding what we're currently looking at as the projection for the increase in the state school fund.
Any other questions or comments on the general fund revenues? All right, that is the end of my presentation. So we do have our next meeting scheduled on May 8th, and then 2 hold places in case discussions overflow into those extra dates. And I'll hand it back to Gary.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate your time. You putting the information together for us. Next on the agenda is our budget committee wrap up. Are there any items that committee members would like to discuss or add comment to? Yeah, Mike, please.
I see that the next thing we're doing is, beginning the process of approving a budget. And I just want to, I'm not sure what the appropriate time is, but it's my understanding, that there has been talk that we are decreasing our special education budget. And I would like to maybe hear more about that decision, if that is the case. And if it's not the case, I would love to be reassured that it isn't. And if it is the case, I would also like to know in what areas we're anticipating decreasing. Because what I'm hearing is that we probably could stand to consider more funding, but that is coming from the direction of the folks on the ground.
I have to agree with Maya. I think it's something that we definitely need to look at. And I would like to suggest that we increase funding towards our special education resources.
Yeah, Tom.
This kind of goes to what I was talking about before, about where we were before the pandemic, and you touched on some ideas or subject of FTE, and I think you cited classified and licensed, I guess all groups. And it would be helpful, I don't know if this body looks at that, but it would be helpful to see where we were, what percentage were licensed folks of how much we spend on salaries. You know, has that changed as a district, as you know, from before the pandemic, through the pandemic, and now, whatever we're calling it now. And that may take more bars on more cells on your graph, but it might be very illuminating to folks who are there's going to be some bullets to bite. There's going to be some hard choices. Everybody, everywhere is saying that. So I'd like to know where we are, where we've been, and where we are now. It might be helpful.
It might be helpful too to also say that we did touch on that during our budget roadshows. So that's an item that you can actually see the presentation on our website. I believe it's on the website. Looking at the communications person. But we did a recording of that budget roadshow where we did talk about what our staffing levels look like for licensed classified administration, how those are proportionate from just, it was about the year before COVID started, and so where we are currently and how that has changed and how the proportions have remained about the same and all that information. But that is a presentation that I would highly suggest that you take a look at. We might provide you some additional information before our next meeting.
Good, thank you.
Can you send that out?
I think yeah, so anyhow, that was gonna say, please, that was exactly what I was gonna say, I saw it in the roadshow, those slides, and they were very helpful. I think there's some other slides in there too that would be really helpful, they showed staff some class size stuff, and yeah.
Yeah, Eric and Gordon?
Yeah, I also would be interested in understanding more about any cuts to the special education and what that looks like in reality, because I want to make sure that we're, you know, that it's an accessibility and an equity issue for these students to access the education that they deserve and that they have the supports that they need, especially for students, you know, also even on 504 plans. So I'd like some more information about that. You know, are we looking at cuts because we're looking at less students being in the program, or yeah, I'm curious to find out more.
Gordon?
Thanks. Just two quick things for next time. One, I think this is already on the agenda, but just to make sure, the request for how we could fund 30 additional EAs or different tiers of that without cutting school level staff, that we'll get that at either the next meeting or the one after that. And then I just wanted to follow up on the point that Maya raised about school supplies. I heard from a number of teachers that they were told that they already had their Band-Aid allocation for the year. And I know there's a lot of, you know, it's like telephone between what the superintendent decides and what may happen in conversations between an administrator and a teacher at the school level. But obviously, if Band-Aid allocation has run out, it means either we're telling kids to bleed all over the table, or really what we're doing is telling teachers and bus drivers and EAs to pay for it out of their pockets. And I know that's not a big dollar thing, but I would just like to get clarity on where we're at with that going forward. Thanks.
Yeah. Anybody else have any comments or questions?
I just have one follow-up question to my question about special education, and I guess this is more of a question about process. So we have these big categories of funds, and then each department has their own budget that they take care of. So for example, thinking of SSD, is it SSD who then just gets the pool of money and decides how they're gonna distribute it? So there might be schools that need more because they have more programs or heavier needs with students, or is that something that is, something that makes its way into the line item big picture budget?
I'm not sure I follow.
Like, do you tell nutrition services how much each school gets, or does nutrition services figure that out for themselves? And the question would pertain to SSD, just knowing that there's some schools that have, you know, both a life skills and LC and maybe other programs, and then other schools will just have a learning center, for example.
Yeah, the funding and related staffing for each school is a decision that is made with SSD staff,
Okay,
but not in isolation. So
okay,
the assistant superintendents for instruction or school support are involved in that. They involve level directors who are talking to building principals and folks on the ground. We've seen some situations even this year where I don't want to say that any school has too many adults, but there was a school with X number of staffing hours with fewer sped students, and another school that had more complex needs with fewer hours, so we made some adjustments there.
okay.
So to an individual, it might feel as though there were reductions across the board, but it's a reallocation or redistribution of resources so that we can meet the needs in an ever-changing landscape.
So when a school has some glaring needs, there is adjusting that can and will.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, last call for comments, questions?
I don't even pretend to tell Jill what to do with nutrition. And I say that because she's in the room.
I just threw out nutrition so that I didn't just hyper focus on SSD.
Right, I've got some items for our next agenda, either follow up that we'll cover, we'll have to cover with us next time. If I missed anything, please let me know. So I've got the follow up on the e-web building funding and how that's going through. The funding on, or the follow up on the ESSER funds, Fund 201, and the FTE associated with that, as well as the projections for those funds going away, and that's going to affect FTE. Follow up on the EEF, just generally following up on how EEF funds are allocated. Then the question around the food services, if we can get a general sense of what the additional funding that it's been taking to provide free food for all students versus what we had prior to free food for all, and a general sense of what that difference is. And the question on special education, looking forward, whether or not it's going to be a reduction or status quo. And then looking at, to Tom's point, sort of circling back to ESSER funds, looking at just FTE, what we were at pre-pandemic versus what we've been at versus what we're looking at in the future, giving a sense of FTE over time. And then Gordon, you had a question, or you had a comment about the EAs. Is that something that the board is going to consider, or is that something you'd like to have covered here?
My memory is that we asked to get the information at a board meeting, but I think everybody thought it would be appropriate to come to budget committee.
I think we voted it down. We chose not to move forward with looking at taking money out of admin to look at how to fund EAs, but then we did go back and look at funding EAs. Is that right, Maya? You kind of made that second proposal, or Judy made that second
I think
proposal?
we expanded it to say, we want to see how we could do that, or how we could spend it on anything, the equivalent amount of money on anything else, so that we would have.
Right,
We
I
have this
agree.
amount of money that we could create, or we could spend on.
But we
research
didn't
features.
we didn't say specifically take it out of admin. You agree with that?
No, I think we did say take it out, how we could do it without decreasing school level staff.
Okay.
I'm fine to look at other things as well. I think we did say that.
Maybe you could look at it and I think you'll notice that it went down 5 to 2. It was you and Maya that said yes on admin, and 5 of us said no, we didn't think we had enough information.
Look at all the sources.
We said look at all sources.
Oh, okay,
That's
well,
what,
then
because Judy made that proposal.
I would like to then, I guess, ask as a budget committee member, that we get in the next budget committee, information on how we could fund either 30 EAs or the equivalent amount of money spent on anything else we could think of without cutting school level staff. And how we could fund it with cutting school level staff is even easier to figure out, because you can just take it from wherever you want to take it. But my question was, if we were going to fund that, what I would like to propose is that we ask to get the information based on the judgment of the superintendent and district leadership of, if we were going to fund that without cutting the school level staff, what is the least destructive way, and what is the least destructive place we could take it from the central administration?
Eugene?
I guess I'd just be curious, just to follow up where the request for what, 30 EAs, did you say, or 50? 30 came from. I mean, maybe there are other needs that we aren't even thinking of. It just seems like a very finite request, and I'm not sure if it's coming from you.
It came from unanimously from all three of the employee groups who testified to us about their budget priorities when we had that hearing a few weeks ago.
So we have that in some notes or something?
Meeting minutes.
I assume it's in the
Oh, in the
minutes.
minutes.
Yeah, we had that panel when MAPS and EA and OCA, and that was the request of all. And then I know the board said, we want to look at other things besides EAs, which is fine. And as far as I'm concerned, we can look at paying for that any place, but I would like one of the options to be in terms of the information that we get of, if we were going to do that without cutting school level staff, what might that look like, right? And the answer might be, it looks like a nightmare, so none of us wants to do it. You know, I don't know what it's going to come. It's just a request for information.
Alicia, you look like you wanted to say something.
Maya was ahead of me. No, I was just gonna say, I think absolutely we heard from our folks, EA, just because we haven't filled the positions, anybody from HR, I mean, we had a large amount that we weren't able to fill. So it seems, I think that's one of the reasons the board voted this proposal down was, yes, they need people in the classrooms, and yes, we can't fill the ones we have. So we're gonna go out and post more when we can't fill them. That was one of the things that came up, and Dr. I don't know if you know how many open positions we have.
I think we have about 25 unfilled positions right now. It was much more earlier in the year. We have been able to successfully fill positions as we've gotten further and further away from September 1, 2022.
Thank you.
So, thanks for spring break, that last meeting feels really far away. And thankfully we have not only minutes, but also recordings, because my recollection is that Judy made a friendly amendment to expand it, like not just EAs, but what would the amount for EAs cost and what else could we do with it? And Gordon accepted that friendly amendment, and I don't remember the part about it coming from a specific place. I remember it saying, tell us where we would have to pull it from, and it was more general. But I don't remember it being voted down. I think we all supported Judy's expanded or amended proposal. But like I said, the beauty of YouTube and our wonderful minutes takers, we don't have to remember, we can go back and look.
And I don't know what it means for tonight anyway. I just wanted clarity on that.
Well,
Yeah, Gordon.
I guess I would just like to then propose it for it to be a budget committee request if we're unclear about what the board did. I mean, we're not talking about a decision to do anything, we're only talking about requesting information. And I would like to know what we can do to add staff at the school level, and whatever could turn out to look good, could turn out to look like a terrible idea. And I'm totally open to saying, I don't know how we say where else it could come from, but certainly if the administration, if anybody says, oh, and here's some other scenarios where we take it not from central administration, but from some other place that we think would be smarter. Or here's all the places we could take it from, and they would all be terrible ideas. Good, all of that information. So I guess if we're not clear about what the board, I mean, rather than waiting to go back and look at the board minutes, given that time is short and you're talking about preparing something for a few weeks from now, I guess I'd like to make that proposal for us. If that's how we do things from the budget committee to request that information. And if you want to add on to other scenarios, however broad you want, more information the better as far as I'm concerned.
I think that a general request for just seeing how we can fold from the EAs and what the scenarios we look at as far as which funding streams does it come from? I think that's a reasonable request.
So
Yes.
I just want to be clear, because not everybody knows, inside baseball on the board, but if it's gonna be over 15 minutes, we kind of have an agreement that had to go. So I can't ask Dr. Dye to do something that's gonna be, like 3 hours or 25 hours of staff time. Yeah, I have to get agreement from people on the board. So I think it's, if that's what you choose to do, but I just really caution this group to understand that staff time is limited and costly. And so we wanna be thoughtful about what we ask. I'm not gonna argue with this, but I just want us to be very thoughtful about that. And so I couldn't support it because we have EA positions that aren't open, and to kind of go and look and say, are we gonna get 30 when we can't fill the ones we have? That's why I voted against it last time. But that's why we as a board have that. But I understand, as a budget committee, we don't really have that. We ask people to make requests, so you don't need a vote or anything. You got your request.
Thank you, Alicia, I appreciate that, and being cognizant of staff time is definitely an important thing to keep in mind. I did see Matt's head nodding as I was talking, so I assumed that he thought it was okay for him to take on. The last agenda item that had come up was the supplies. I'm just wondering if you could maybe eliminate some of the rumor mills around where we are this year with supplies in that quick half of the slide, the information would be appreciated. Any other items for future agenda or follow-up from staff? Thank you for your patience going through that and for everybody being open to hear each other. All right, if we don't have any other items, we will conclude this meeting. It's now 7:35. I appreciate staff's time and everybody's time this evening. Thank you for being here and contributing. And we'll see you next time.
So